The silence in Lin Meifeng's apartment wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a presence, thick and settled like the dust on the spines of books she hadn't opened in years. At 68, retirement from her lifelong post as a librarian in Suzhou hadn't brought the peaceful leisure she'd envisioned. Instead, it had carved out a space where loneliness echoed. Her movements were meticulous, tracing the same paths across the polished wooden floor. From the small kitchen where she prepared simple meals for one, to the armchair where she read, to the window overlooking a concrete courtyard where neighbours hung out their laundry like colourful, flapping flags. Her apartment, neat and ordered, reflected a life carefully curated, yet missing vibrancy. Books lined every shelf, witnesses to decades spent cataloguing other people's stories while her own felt increasingly unwritten. 15 years had passed since the divorce, a messy tearing away from a man whose infidelities and differing values had finally become unbearable. The separation had brought whispers, pitying glances, a subtle social demotion in their circle, a shame that still clung to her like the damp Suzhou air in spring. She had poured herself into raising her children, Lin Wei and Lin Xiaohua, shielding them as best she could, but the effort had left her depleted. Sometimes, usually late at night when the city's hum subsided, she would unroll a sheet of rice paper on the sturdy calligraphy table tucked away in a corner. Her hand, slender-boned, would tremble slightly as she lifted the brush, dipped it in the freshly ground ink. The strokes were hesitant, practiced in secret, a longing for expression kept hidden away like a guilty secret. Was it too late? The question often surfaced unbidden. Too late to mend the past, too late to start anew, too late even for this simple pleasure without feeling the weight of judgment. She usually rolled the paper up quickly, hiding it away before the ink was fully dry, the faint scent of pine soot lingering like a reproach. Her son, Lin Wei, successful and sharp in his Shanghai suits, called dutifully every week. His concern was genuine, she knew, but it often felt like scrutiny. "Mother, are you eating properly? You should get out more. Don't just sit there." Underlying his words was the unspoken fear. Don't make another mistake. Don't embarrass us again. Xiaohua, her daughter, softer and more understanding, lived further away and her calls were gentler. "Mom, maybe you could join a class? Something for yourself? Like that calligraphy you used to enjoy?" Xiaohua's suggestion, offered lightly during one such call, resonated differently. It wasn't about filling time, but perhaps about reclaiming a small piece of herself. The idea lodged itself in her mind, a tiny seed in the barren soil of her days. A week later, fueled by a quiet desperation she wouldn't admit even to herself, Meifeng found herself standing outside the local community centre. The notice board fluttered with announcements. Tai Chi, fan dancing, senior choir. And there it was, calligraphy for seniors, Tuesdays and Thursdays. Her heart gave an unfamiliar flutter. Taking a deep breath that tasted of city dust and faint floral notes from a nearby garden, she pushed open the door. The classroom was bright, filled with the low murmur of elderly voices and the crisp smell of ink. She chose a seat near the back, feeling conspicuous, her librarian's instinct to observe rather than participate taking over. Then he walked in. He wasn't tall or imposing, but there was a stillness about him, a quiet dignity in the way he carried his sturdy frame. His hands, she noticed, were weathered, suggesting a life of practical work, yet they moved with surprising grace as he arranged his own brushes and inkstone. He nodded politely to the room, his gaze calm and steady, settling into a seat across from her. His simple, clean Mao-style jacket seemed comfortably worn. Meifeng quickly looked down at her own paper, feeling a blush creep up her neck. Throughout the class, led by a patient instructor, she found her eyes drifting towards him. He worked with intense concentration, his brush moving with a fluid certainty that spoke of long practice. There was no flourish, just a deep connection between intent and execution. She felt a pang of admiration mixed with her usual reticence. After several sessions, the silence between them began to fray at the edges. A shared smile over a particularly challenging character, a murmured comment about the quality of the ink. His name, she learned, was Chen Jianguo. He was 72, a widower and a retired practitioner of traditional Chinese medicine. His presence was grounding, unlike the nervous energy she often felt around others. One Thursday, as they were both packing up, he spoke, his voice low and even. "Librarian Lin," he began, using the respectful title someone must have mentioned, "your control of the brush has improved greatly. There is real feeling in your strokes now." Mei Feng was taken aback by the direct compliment, the sincerity in his calm eyes. "Thank you, Practitioner Chen," she managed, feeling the heat rise in her cheeks again. Yours is very masterful." He simply inclined his head. "Practice is a form of meditation. It quiets the mind." He paused. "There is a small tea house near the lingering garden. Their Biluochun tea is excellent. Perhaps you would join me sometime after class?" The invitation was unexpected, simple, yet it sent a ripple of something akin to panic through her. To be seen, publicly, with a man? But his steady gaze held no hidden agenda, only quiet courtesy. And the thought of Biluochun tea, fragrant and delicate, was tempting. That would be nice, she heard herself say, surprising herself with her own acquiescence. Their first tea was quiet, punctuated by the clink of ceramic cups and the distant sounds of Suzhou life outside the traditional wooden window lattice. They spoke of calligraphy, of the changing seasons reflected in the nearby garden, of the quiet satisfaction found in focused work. Jiang Guo didn't pry into her past, nor did he dwell on his own loss, but Mei Feng sensed a shared understanding of solitude, a mutual respect for the quiet spaces in their lives. His calm presence was a balm, soothing the anxieties that usually prickled beneath her surface. Leaving the tea house, walking beside him under the plane trees lining the canal, Mei Feng felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. Their meetings became a quiet ritual. Sometimes tea, sometimes a slow walk through the humble administrator's garden, admiring the way sunlight filtered through bamboo groves or shimmered on the koi pond. Jiang Guo shared insights from his TCM practice, linking the flow of ink to the flow of qi, the balance in composition to the balance needed in life. His wisdom was practical, rooted in observation, much like his calligraphy. He spoke of herbs and meridians with the same quiet passion he applied to his brushstrokes. One afternoon he invited her to his small clinic, tucked away in an older district. It was simple, clean, smelling faintly of dried herbs and aged wood. He showed her his collection of hand-carved wooden seals, each intricate character a miniature work of art. Seeing his hands, steady and skilled, transform a block of wood, Mei Feng felt a growing respect deepen into something warmer, more personal. She, in turn, began to practice her calligraphy with less hesitation, the fear of judgment slowly receding under his quiet encouragement. She even dared to show him a scroll she'd been working on, a poem about the resilience of bamboo. He studied it intently, his usual calm expression softening. "There is strength here, Mei Feng," he said, using her given name for the first time. "And grace." The simple words filled her with a quiet joy. The companionship felt natural, unforced, a gentle unfolding like the ferns in the shaded corners of the gardens they frequented. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, but a slow, steady merging of two quiet streams. The inevitable disruption arrived in the form of Lin Wei. He came down from Shanghai for a weekend visit, his sharp eyes immediately noticing the subtle shift in his mother's demeanor. She seemed less contained. There was a softness around her eyes, a quiet animation when she spoke of her calligraphy class. "You seem well, Mother," he commented over dinner, his tone neutral but probing. Mei Feng murmured agreement, focusing on serving him more dumplings. Later that evening, as Mei Feng was clearing the table, Wei spoke again, more directly. "Mrs. Jiang from downstairs mentioned seeing you quite often with an older gentleman. From your class?" Mei Feng froze, the plate heavy in her hands. Mrs. Jiang, the resident busybody whose balcony overlooked the entrance to their building, missed nothing. "He is a friend, Wei. Practitioner Chen. We share an interest in calligraphy." Wei's brow furrowed. "Practitioner? What kind?" "Traditional Chinese medicine," Mei Feng said quietly, bracing herself. Wei put down his chopsticks with a sharp click. "A TCM practitioner? Mother, are you serious? After what happened with Father, involving yourself with someone like that? Is he even reputable? What do people know about him? Is he after your savings? You're retired, living modestly. What could he possibly want?" The accusations tumbled out, laced with the familiar anxiety about face and the underlying trauma of his father's betrayal. "Wei, please," Mei Feng interrupted, her voice trembling slightly. "He is a kind, respectable man, a widower. We simply enjoy talking, practicing our art." Art? Wei scoffed, his voice rising. Mother, you're nearly 70. This isn't the time for art with strange men. Think of your reputation. Think of our reputation. Have you forgotten the whispers, the shame after the divorce? Do you want to put us through that again? For some old herbalist? The word herbalist dripped with condescension. Mei Feng felt the old shame wash over her, hot and suffocating. Tears pricked her eyes, but anger simmered beneath. He is not some old herbalist, Wei. He is a good man, and my age does not mean my life is over. It means you should be sensible, Wei retorted, standing up abruptly. I forbid you to see him again. It's for your own good. You're too trusting. He stormed out of the small dining area, leaving Mei Feng standing amidst the cooling dinner dishes, the scent of vinegar and ginger suddenly sharp and unpleasant. The fragile bloom of hope within her felt crushed. The following days were heavy with unspoken tension. Mei Feng skipped the next calligraphy class, the thought of facing Jian Guo, or worse, Mrs. Jiang, unbearable. Wei called daily, his tone briskly cheerful, asking if she'd come to her senses. Mei Feng gave non-committal answers, her voice flat. Loneliness, the familiar resident of her apartment, seemed to settle back in, heavier than before. Xiaohua called, having undoubtedly heard Wei's version of events. Mom, she began hesitantly, Wei is just worried. You know how he is about losing face, but Practitioner Chen, does he make you happy? The simple question brought fresh tears to Mei Feng's eyes. He is good company, Xiaohua, respectful. Then maybe Wei is overreacting? Xiaohua ventured, though her voice lacked conviction, clearly unwilling to directly oppose her brother. Just be careful, Mom, please. Mei Feng felt adrift, caught between her son's rigid disapproval, her daughter's hesitant sympathy, and the quiet pull towards Jian Guo's steady presence. Was Wei right? Was she being foolish, naive? Was this quiet connection worth the potential family rift, the renewed societal scrutiny? Mrs. Jiang's knowing glances as she swept the corridor outside her door felt like physical blows. One afternoon, a small package appeared outside her door. Inside was a carefully wrapped bundle of dried chrysanthemum flowers and goji berries. A simple note, in Jian Guo's elegant script, lay on top. For calming the spirit, Chen Jianguo. No questions, no demands, just a quiet gesture of care. Holding the fragrant herbs, Mei Feng felt a surge of warmth push back against the cold tide of fear and doubt. Jian Guo hadn't pressured her, hadn't intruded, simply offered support in his own quiet way. He respected her space, her struggle. And in that moment, she knew she couldn't let Wei's fear or Mrs. Jiang's judgment dictate the remainder of her life. She had spent too many years living under the shadow of others' expectations. Drawing strength from that small packet of herbs and the memory of Jian Guo's calm acceptance, Mei Feng made a decision. She would not hide. The next Tuesday she walked into the calligraphy class, her head held a little higher. Jian Guo looked up as she entered, a flicker of relief crossing his usually placid features. He simply nodded, a silent welcome that spoke volumes. Current part characters, 2,750. Total characters, 46 and 20. They resumed their quiet companionship, though Mei Feng found herself more aware of potential observers. They met in the less crowded corners of gardens, chose quieter tea houses. The secrecy chafed, but the connection deepened, forged now not just by shared interests, but by a shared, unspoken defiance. It was during one such meeting, sitting on a stone bench overlooking a placid canal reflecting the weeping willows, that Jian Guo spoke of an idea. There is a small community space near my clinic, he said, watching a boat glide silently past. They sometimes allow local artists to display their work. Perhaps we could show some of our pieces. Your calligraphy, perhaps some of my seals or writings on health preservation. Mei Feng looked at him, surprised. An exhibition? Publicly displaying their work together. It felt audacious. What would be the purpose, she asked hesitantly. Not for fame, Mei Feng, he replied gently, but as an affirmation of the value in these quiet pursuits, of finding meaning at any age, a quiet statement perhaps that we are still here, still creating. The idea resonated with her. It wasn't about confronting Wei or silencing Mrs. Jiang. It was about claiming their own narrative, expressing the quiet joy and mutual respect they had found through the art that had brought them together. It felt like the right way to respond, not with anger or argument, but with quiet creation. Yes, she said, the word feeling firm and clear. Yes, Jian Guo, let's do that. Planning the exhibition became their shared project, a quiet conspiracy of hope. They spent hours selecting pieces, Mei Feng carefully mounting her best scrolls, Jian Guo choosing seals and writing short philosophical verses on health and balance that complemented her calligraphy. They found the community space Jian Guo had mentioned, a small, slightly dusty room off a quiet alley, but with good light. Preparing the space together, hanging scrolls, arranging Jian Guo's small wooden stands, felt intimate and purposeful. Xiaohua, informed via a cautious phone call, offered hesitant encouragement and promised to try and come, though she sounded nervous about Wei's reaction. The day of the exhibition arrived, a bright, cool autumn afternoon. Sunlight streamed through the cleaned windows of the small gallery space. It wasn't grand, but it felt authentic, filled with their shared aesthetic. Mei Feng's elegant flowing script beside Jian Guo's grounded, intricate seals and calm verses. A few friends from the calligraphy class arrived, along with some of Jian Guo's former patients, murmuring appreciation. Mrs. Jiang appeared, peering intently at the scrolls, her expression unreadable. Xiaohua arrived, giving her mother a quick, supportive hug, though her eyes darted nervously towards the door. Mei Feng stood beside Jian Guo, smoothing the fabric of her simple qipao top, her heart beating a little too fast. He gave her hand a brief, reassuring squeeze. Then the door opened, and Lin Wei stood there. He wore his sharp Shanghai suit, looking profoundly out of place, his face a mask of tense neutrality. A hush fell over the small gathering. Mei Feng felt her breath catch. Wei's eyes scanned the room, taking in the modest display, the quiet observers, his mother standing beside practitioner Chen. He didn't approach them immediately, but began walking slowly along the walls, examining the calligraphy, pausing before Jian Guo's seals. Mei Feng watched him, her hands clasped tightly. What would he say? Would he cause a scene? She saw him stop before one of her scrolls. The poem about bamboo resilience she had shown Jian Guo. He studied it for a long moment. Jian Guo moved quietly to stand near Wei, not intruding, simply present. Wei turned slightly, acknowledging him with a stiff nod. "Practitioner Chen," Wei said, his voice low. "Mother seems invested in this." "We find peace in these simple things," Jian Guo replied calmly, his gaze steady. "It is good to cultivate peace at any age." There was no challenge in his tone, only quiet statement. Wei looked from Jian Guo back to his mother, who met his gaze steadily, a quiet strength in her eyes he hadn't seen before. He saw the genuine respect in the way Jian Guo stood slightly behind her, supportive but not possessive. He saw the calm fulfillment on her face, a serenity that had been absent for years. He overheard a quiet comment from another visitor. "Librarian Lin's work has such spirit now." Wei's rigid posture seemed to soften almost imperceptibly. The anger, the controlling fear hadn't vanished, but something else was dawning. A grudging recognition, perhaps, of his mother as an individual, not just a role she played in his life or a potential source of embarrassment. He walked over to Mei Feng. The small crowd held its breath. "Mother," he began, his voice still stiff but lacking the earlier accusatory edge. He gestured towards the bamboo scroll. "The calligraphy, it's stronger than before." He paused, searching for words. "Just be careful." It wasn't an apology, it wasn't a declaration of support, but it was a concession, a crack in the wall of his disapproval, an acknowledgement of her skill and, perhaps, her right to this unexpected happiness. It was more than Mei Feng had dared to hope for. "Thank you, Wei," she whispered, relief washing over her in a warm wave. He gave a curt nod, glanced one more time at Jian Guo, and then turned and left as abruptly as he had arrived. The tension in the room eased. Xiaohua rushed forward, beaming, embracing her mother properly this time. "Mom, it's wonderful, truly, and Practitioner Chen, your seals are exquisite." Mrs. Jiang, perhaps sensing the shift in dynamics, offered a thin, forced smile before making her exit. The remaining visitors lingered, chatting quietly, the atmosphere warm and appreciative. The exhibition, in its own quiet way, was a success. It hadn't changed the world, but it had shifted something within their small orbit. Some weeks later, the autumn chill had deepened, turning the leaves on the canal-side trees to gold and russet. Mei Feng and Jian Guo sat together in her apartment, the late afternoon sun slanting through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. A pot of chrysanthemum tea steeped between them, its faint floral scent mingling with the familiar smell of ink. Jian Guo was examining a new seal he had carved, while Mei Feng slowly practiced strokes on a fresh sheet of rice paper. The silence between them was comfortable, companionable, filled not with emptiness but with shared presence. Wei hadn't called to object further. Xiaohua had called several times, her tone warm and genuinely interested in the exhibition's aftermath. Mrs. Jiang still offered her usual scrutiny, but it felt distant now, its power diminished. Mei Feng dipped her brush, the movement smooth, assured. She glanced at Jian Guo, his face calm and focused in the golden light. He looked up, meeting her gaze, and a slow smile touched his lips. No grand declarations were needed. They had navigated the turbulent waters of family expectation and societal judgment, not by fleeing, but by quietly tending to the garden of their shared life, cultivating peace and mutual respect. Here, in the quiet rhythm of their days, surrounded by books and ink and the subtle scent of herbs, they had found their own late spring, a season of unexpected warmth and quiet, resilient bloom. The brush moved across the paper, leaving a bold, clear line. Life settled into this new rhythm. The exhibition, small as it was, had subtly altered Mei Feng's standing, not just within her family, but within herself. She no longer practiced calligraphy in secret. The table was permanently set up, scrolls sometimes left unrolled to dry openly. She carried herself with a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. Her relationship with Jiang Guo continued its gentle deepening. They still attended the calligraphy class, now as respected peers rather than just participants. Their walks through Suzhou's gardens took on a comfortable familiarity, each path known, each vista appreciated anew through shared glances. They learned the landscape of each other's pasts gradually, sharing stories not out of obligation, but as small offerings of trust, his memories of his late wife, her carefully worded recollections of the difficult years after her divorce. They learned the landscape of each other's pasts gradually, sharing stories not out of obligation, but as small offerings of trust. His memories of his late wife, her carefully worded recollections of the difficult years. There were no attempts to erase or rewrite history, only a quiet acceptance of the paths that had led them to this point. Lin Wei's acceptance remained tentative, expressed more through a lack of opposition than active enthusiasm. He visited less frequently, his calls still focused on practicalities, but the sharp edge of disapproval was gone. He once awkwardly brought a gift for Jian Guo, an expensive pen set, which Jian Guo accepted with polite grace, though he still preferred his traditional brushes. It was Wei's way of extending an olive branch, however stiffly. Xiaohua, however, became a more active presence. She visited from her city whenever she could, often joining her mother and Jian Guo for tea or a meal. She asked Jian Guo thoughtful questions about TCM, listened intently to his explanations, and seemed genuinely relieved to see her mother looking so content. "He's good for you, Mom," she said one evening, as they washed dishes together after Jian Guo had left. "He lets you be yourself." Mei Feng simply smiled, the truth of it warming her more than the soapy water. Even the community's perception seemed to soften, or perhaps Mei Feng simply noticed the judgment less. Mrs. Jiang still offered commentary. "Ah, Librarian Lin, still keeping company with the good practitioner?" But her words lacked their former sting. Others in the neighborhood seemed to accept the quiet couple as a fixture, nodding politely, occasionally stopping to chat about the weather or local news. Their relationship wasn't scandalous anymore, it was just them. Mei Feng realized that much of the power of societal judgment lay in one's own fear of it. By refusing to hide, by quietly affirming their connection through shared interests and mutual respect, they had subtly shifted the narrative. One crisp winter morning, snow dusting the curved eaves of the nearby temple, Jian Guo arrived at Mei Feng's apartment with a proposal. "Mei Feng," he said, stamping the snow from his boots, "the community center is looking for someone to teach an introductory calligraphy class. The regular instructor is unwell. They asked if I knew anyone." He looked at her expectantly. Mei Feng felt a familiar flicker of doubt. Teaching? Standing before others, guiding their hands? "Oh, I don't know, Jian Guo," she demurred. "I'm still learning myself." "You have much to offer," he countered gently. "Your understanding is deep, your hand is steady, and," he added with a rare twinkle in his eye, "your patience was honed by decades in the library." She laughed, a sound still slightly unfamiliar but growing more frequent. The thought was daunting yet intriguing. It felt like another step out of the shadows. Sharing her passion, not just displaying it. Perhaps I could try, she conceded. Her first class was nerve-wracking. Her hands felt clumsy, her voice thinner than usual. But as she began demonstrating the basic strokes, explaining the importance of posture and breath, the years of quiet practice and deep appreciation took over. She found she enjoyed sharing the nuances, guiding hesitant beginners, seeing the spark of understanding in their eyes. Jian Guo attended that first class, sitting quietly at the back, offering silent support. Afterwards, he simply said, "You were born for this, Mei Feng." Her teaching became another quiet thread woven into the fabric of their life. It brought her into contact with new people, gave her a renewed sense of purpose beyond her own apartment walls. She wasn't just retired librarian Lin anymore. She was teacher Lin, sharing her love for an ancient art. Their life wasn't dramatic. It consisted of small moments, sharing bowls of warm congee on cold mornings, browsing antique markets for old inkstones, Jian Guo patiently explaining the properties of different herbs as they walked past traditional medicine shops, Mei Feng reading poetry aloud as Jian Guo carved a new seal. There were still echoes of past sorrows, moments of quiet melancholy that visited them both, but these were now held within the larger container of their shared present, softened by companionship. They didn't need grand adventures or passionate declarations. Their love was like a well-tended Suzhou garden, carefully cultivated, finding beauty in balance, resilience, and the quiet endurance of the seasons. Current part characters, 28 and 17. Total characters, 28 and 7 and 28. Spring returned to Suzhou, painting the canal sides with the tender green of new willow leaves and the vibrant pinks and whites of plum and cherry blossoms. Mei Feng and Jian Guo sat in their favorite tea house near the lingering garden, the scent of blooming jasmine drifting through the open window. They were discussing the upcoming Dragon Boat Festival, planning perhaps to watch the races on the Jinji Lake. Suddenly, Mei Feng saw Xiaohua approaching their table, a wide smile on her face, but she wasn't alone. Beside her, looking slightly awkward but resigned, was Lin Wei. "Mom, Practitioner Chen." Xiaohua greeted them warmly. "Wei decided to surprise us for the weekend." Wei offered a stiff nod. "Mother, Practitioner Chen." Mei Feng exchanged a quick glance with Jian Guo. Wei's presence was still unexpected, but the tension that had once accompanied his visits was markedly reduced. "Wei, Xiaohua, sit down, join us," Mei Feng invited, gesturing to the empty stools. They ordered more tea. The conversation was stilted at first, Wei mostly listening as Xiaohua chatted about her work and asked Jian Guo about seasonal health tips. But gradually, Wei began to participate, asking a surprisingly informed question about a particular calligraphy style he'd seen at the exhibition, mentioning an article he'd read about preserving traditional crafts. Mei Feng listened, a quiet sense of wonder.